Well, the book Incident at Devil's Den details one of the most disturbing abduction events ever recorded. In fact, it may very well be the most disturbing. Terry Lovelace has been a lifelong experiencer. Recently, we did a three-part series on some of Terry's childhood experiences titled Aliens in the Bedroom. Terry's released a follow-up book to Incident at Devil's Den called Devil's Den: The Reckoning. Includes details of his early childhood experiences, information on his friend Toby, an entity named Betty, and 30 amazing accounts from other experiences. And Terry's joining us now. Hi, Terry.
Hi, Dean. How are you? Nice to be here.
I'm feeling great, and good to have you back with us again. And we're going to be talking about the new book, The Reckoning. So, why did you do the follow up?
I felt the need for the follow-up because there were so many unanswered questions in Devil's Den, specifically regarding Toby and what happened to my friend. That was the most common question I received. Um, and then I made an observation in the beginning of the book, in the prologue, I believe, where I spoke about an abduction or a missing person case from Devil's Den from August of 2017, when a 32-year-old man from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, named Rodney Letterman was walking on the Butterfield Trail through Devil's Den State Park and went missing under bizarre circumstances. And I said to the readers, I said, if I get an update, I will let you know. Well, there is an update to that story. In March of 2019, 1 year after I published Devil's Den, almost to the day, there was a news article in the Arkansas Gazette regarding Rodney Letterman. And there was a young couple walking down the Butterfield Trail that cuts through the park. And the young lady saw on a log sitting right on the trail, right next to the trail, what she thought at first was an albino turtle.
Wow.
And she asked her companion, she said, "Is that an albino turtle?" And he goes over and he picks it up and looks at it close and then drops it because he realizes it was the skull cap. It was the top of Rodney Letterman's skull. So said the Bartlesville medical examiner, Bartlesville, Oklahoma. So that
Wow.
was all that was ever found of Rodney Letterman. So he was found. Uh, and what I found disturbing was the fact that the placement of his remains there on a log where they were in plain view, open and obvious area.
hmm
I found that rather disturbing.
Yeah, and you mentioned mysteriously disappeared because it was very mysterious, wasn't it?
It was incredibly strange. This was a Saturday, and there were a lot of people walking the trail. It's a paved asphalt trail, and Mr. Letterman had asthma. And about a mile into their walk, he realized that he'd left his inhaler in the truck, and he was starting to wheeze. Then he asked his friend, "Would you mind? Would you run back to the truck and grab my inhaler for me?" Friend said, "Sure, no worries." So friend runs back to the truck, grabs the inhaler, runs back. When he gets back, there's no Rodney Letterman, but his cell phone is on the ground. Now, I don't know about you, but my cell phone's either in my hand or in my pocket.
hmm
I don't lay it down on the ground anywhere. And he called for his friend, thinking he might, maybe he stepped in the woods to relieve himself or something. And but no, Mr. Letterman. He notifies the park rangers. They take it very seriously, and they mounted an immediate search. 2,500 volunteers. They had helicopters with forward-looking infrared radar looking for a heat signature. Tracked the guy down. Nothing. They found nothing. And the family, that search, official search, lasted for 1 week. Afterward, the family paid for private trackers and searchers to continue the hunt for Rodney Letterman until throughout October of 2017. And nothing was ever found of him. That is until March of 2019, when they found his skull cap on top of the log. They sent it to the medical examiner. They treated it like a forensic, like a crime scene, and bagged it and did all the proper forensic protocol and sent it to the medical examiner, who, through DNA analysis, identified it as belonging to Rodney Letterman.
Mm. And it was what the trackers said that really pricked a lot of people's ears.
Yeah, I had called the Russellville Police Department and or Sheriff's Department, I should say, and I talked to a deputy sheriff there who asked to remain anonymous, and I respect that. Um, who was kind enough to tell me that they have the tracking dogs, and I knew that their department handles that. So um, he said that their tracking dogs are bloodhounds. They brought them to the scene, and they could track Rodney from the truck all the way to the point where they found his phone. They got a scent from the phone, and then they just sat down.
Hmm.
And I asked the man. I said, well, deputy, I don't understand much about tracking dogs. Can you tell me what that means? And he says, well, what it means is that the scent went no further than that. He either carefully traced his footsteps back to the truck,
Yep.
or he went up. He said that's the only two options that I can think of. And I found that to be disturbing.
Wow. It certainly is. It's a really fascinating fascinating situation. Terry, the book, you mentioned that a lot of people have wondered what happened to your friend Toby. Can you kind of give us a little bit of a update on that?
I can. And to do that, I really should go back to when we were both still at Whiteman Air Force Base. We had been separated. We had been ordered by the OSI, the Office of Special Investigation, the security police, to have no contact with one another. And I'm convinced the reason for that is that two people have a much more convincing story than a single witness.
Hmm.
So they made sure that we stayed apart. I was under strict orders not to have any contact with him, not by phone, not in person, not in writing, not through third parties. Um, and they made it very clear that if I disobeyed that order, there'd be quote consequences.
Hmm.
So, but and they cut the guy orders for Japan at light speed, so he was going to be gone in a matter of a few weeks. Um, we both were NCOs, and we both lived on the base in base family housing. So they gave us we lived in a little duplex on the base. My wife and I, we were both married, and Toby and his wife, and they lived just a few blocks from us. And coming home from the grocery store one day, I asked my wife, I said, stop by Toby's. I just want to run in and tell the guy goodbye. And it was really a mixed emotion. After Devil's Den, I really kind of wanted nothing to do with the guy. And I don't understand that emotion. I didn't understand it then. I don't understand it today, but I find that that's not too uncommon, actually. When a group of friends will have a witness a shared experience, and then all of a sudden it's like the band breaks up. Everybody goes in
Yeah.
a different direction. Um, so I felt that saying goodbye to Toby would give me some measure of closure and help me, process what had happened to us. And my wife said, don't mess with these OSI people. They scare me. And I admitted, yeah, they scare me too. But I said, look, I'll be in there 4 minutes. And so I went up to the door, same door I'd walked through 100 times before. And I did what I always did. I knocked 3 times, opened the door and said, hey guys, it's me. And then I stepped in and Toby's wife walked past me and they were packing. And she was carrying a box or something in her hand. And she glared at me and said, you're not supposed to be here. And I said, I know. Look, I'm not here for a confrontation. I understand you guys have orders to Japan, and I just wanted to stop by and wish Toby well, wish you both well. Because we've been very close, you
Yeah.
know. The four of us, his wife and my wife were friends. The four of us would play cards together, socialize, barbecue, do stuff. So, but I felt really unsettled when I walked through the door. And Toby must have heard our exchange because he walked around the corner from the bedroom and we met in the hall near the vestibule by the front door. And he was a wreck. He was a person who was always very meticulous about his appearance. And when he walked out, I mean, I understood he was moving, so I kind of cut him some slack because of that. But his hair was sideways. He hadn't shaven. He was in a dirty t-shirt, blue jeans, and no shoes. And I'd never seen him like that. I mean, this is the guy that always had shined his shoes, always had a haircut within regs, always had the
Hmm.
starched uniform, where I was kind of a slob, but
Right.
he was extremely meticulous about his appearance. And that was just out of character for him, I thought. And when I saw him, it felt awkward. It didn't feel right. And he walked up to me, and he was shorter by a few inches than I am. And I stuck out my hand as he stuck out his hand, and we missed one another. And we finally do this back and forth, and we manage this elegant handshake. And he looks up at me, and his eyes are bloodshot, and I can smell liquor on his breath. And that's totally out of character for my friend. I mean, he might drink a beer when we're playing cards or something, but I've never seen him drink more than two in my life. I'd certainly never seen the guy drunk. Um, so yeah, out of character. And he looked up at me and he asked, "It happened, didn't it, Terry?" And I said, "Yes, my brother, it really happened. You're not losing your mind." And then he said, "But why us?" And I broke eye contact with him, and I looked at my shoes, and I felt a panic attack or something. I just felt, and I said, "Man, I haven't got an expletive clue." And I turned and I ran out of the house and ran back to the car.
Hmm.
And yeah, instead of feeling settled or any closure, it was really just more upsetting than it was anything else.
Yeah.
That was the last time I saw him. Now, when I separated from the Air Force, he went to Japan with his wife Tammy and their kids, and we hadn't heard from them. And then one day, a few years later, my wife got a phone call from Tammy, Toby's ex. And she explained that she and Toby had split up while they were in Japan, separated, and then divorced shortly thereafter. She had custody of the two little kids. And Toby was back in Michigan living with his dad. Now, I had his dad's phone number. So, and also she said she had remarried, and the guy she married was a long haul trucker, and he was taking a load of freight to Detroit. And she said, "We're going to be in your neck of the woods. Would you like some company?" And my wife was like, "Absolutely, come by. Let's have dinner and catch up. Bring pictures of the kids, and we can have a nice visit." And she was excited to do that, and so they came and met her new husband, and the four of us had dinner. And of course, I wanted to ask everything about Toby, and did or tried to, but it was kind of uncomfortable for her new husband, I think, because I'm focused on her ex, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not a popular topic. But she was able to tell me that he had been discharged from the Air Force. She wasn't sure of the circumstances, but he'd been discharged. That he had a problem with alcohol, um, and that curiously, she said that he didn't really drink during the day, but he was afraid to go to sleep at night. And I was having the same problem. I was afraid to lie down and shut my eyes because, when we're asleep, we're not only that, we're vulnerable.
Hmm.
And I mean, that's when our minds are open and the monsters can come in,
Yeah.
that's so sleep has always been hard to come by since this 1977 event. Um, so she said that Toby would, before bedtime, down, several shots of vodka, uh, and then go to sleep. Well, if you do that, I mean, that interferes with your REM sleep. That interferes with a lot of things, and can cause you problems. And his life pretty much fell apart from
Yeah.
there. I called his dad in Michigan in Flint, and he answered the phone, and I said, "Yeah, I'm trying to reach my old friend Toby," and he knew who I was. I told him who I was. He knew who I was. And he says, "Well, Toby doesn't stay here, but he's here now and then." And I got the impression maybe he's homeless. I don't know. Uh,
Wow.
and I told him, I asked, "Would you please take my phone number? And if you hear from Toby, have him call me." And he promised that he would. So 6, 8 months later, it's Christmas season. And I'm thinking, I haven't heard from Toby, and I thought I would. So I thought I'm going to call the old man back. And I did, and the phone had been disconnected. Well, we found out from Tammy what had happened was the family had given Toby the home, to live in after the dad passed away. And he had employment problems that led to financial issues and non-payment of taxes, and he ended up losing the family home.
Goodness.
And that was the last that she knew. So yeah, his life took a downward spiral, which is just terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't recover at all.
Oh. And I don't think he'd taken that trajectory but for our event.
Yeah.
We all process it differently. The last part of the story is in the late 80s, I was working on a case that involved a couple FBI agents, one of whom I became friends with. And we would have, Frank and I would have a drink. We'd have a drink at the bar Friday nights after work on occasion and just talk about the week and the like. And I had the thought, maybe he can help me find my friend. So I asked him, I'm trying to find this guy I was in the military with. Can you help me find him? And he said, and this is FBI humor, okay? He said, yeah, sure, as long as he's not a fugitive. So, the FBI, that's kind of their job, is to catch fugitives. So it's very dry humor, but I feigned a laugh, and he laughed at his own joke. And he said, yeah, sure, I can help you out. He said, write down for me everything that you know about the guy. His likes, his dislikes, a picture of him if you got it, relatives, school affiliation, anything you can think of. Write it all down and get it to me. So I did. Put it in an envelope with his name on it, marked confidential, dropped it off at his office. And about a week and a half later, I got a call from him, and he said, hey, you want to get together and have a beer Friday? I got some information about your friend. And I said, my God, yes, thank you. I'd like that. So we met at the usual place, and I got there before he did. Actually, he was late. And when he walked through the door, I could tell something was amiss. He just, he looked like he had bad news.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. And he sat down. The first thing he said was, I'm sorry, I have bad news about your buddy. And I said, well, tell me. And he says, I'm afraid your friend is dead. And I was shocked. I'm like, dead? How can he be dead? He's a young man. And he said, well, Terry, it was an automobile accident on 94, Highway 94, leading out of Flint toward Detroit. It was a head-on collision. He was killed instantly. He said, I'm very sorry, but he said, you've been around the block, these things happen, and we just accept it and move on. So, that was a little hard to get through, but I thought, yeah, I guess that's the way life is.
Yeah.
So I went on, and then in 2017, when I'm writing this book, I thought, I think I want to find his obituary and maybe go to Michigan and visit his gravesite. So I found his obit, and it was dated September 4th, 2007. He was alive until September 4th, 2007. My friend had lied to me.
Wow.
I don't know why he would lie to me. And I got some flack from that from other FBI agents. And I want to make sure that, anybody in law enforcement out there knows I'm not, tarring everyone with the same brush. I had nothing but respect for law enforcement. I myself was a prosecutor for years. So, I have respect for law enforcement. And I don't know. I mean, he may have been doing his duty. There may be a file somewhere that says these guys shouldn't get together. I don't know.
It's what it sounds like. It seems to stem all the way back to the time you were both in that hospital in separate rooms.
I think so.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right. Well, we published a 3-part series on the Monkey Men on arlhub.com. That was the period between 62 and 64, and during that series, you spoke about an entity called Sue. Who later became Betty, but I just wondered, are they the same entity?
They are indeed the same entity.
I was just going to say, maybe refresh our viewers and listeners about who Sue was.
Yeah, in the final chapter of the book, Incident at Devil's Den, the first book, I explained that in October 2017, while I was in the middle of writing this book, actually toward the end of writing this book, um, I woke up in my living room, um, and I'm sitting in my favorite chair, and I open my eyes, and I've never sleepwalked, not once in my life. And I'm confused, like, how did I get here? Um, and when we had our experience in 1977, when we first saw this craft and figured out that it was not natural, not man-made,
Hmm.
um, that I had started to panic, and then I felt this feeling of calm wash over me. And I think I explained that in one of our interviews. And I had that same feeling of calm wash over me. So here I had this stranger seated across from me, and I'm not scared. I'm okay with it. And I glance to my left, and I can see that the alarm panel for the alarm system is set properly. It doesn't show that there's an intruder. And my cat, I can see to my right, my cat's all chill. She's laying on the couch, just stretching, and doesn't seem to be bothered at all. And normally, if there's a stranger in the room, she'd be checking him or her out.
Hmm.
And this woman is wearing large, oversized sunglasses, and she has on a wig that is kind of reminiscent of what the hairstyle my sisters wore in the 60s.
Right.
It's out
Right.
of date.
Yep.
My hair's black, and it's obviously a wig, and it's on her head sideways, kind of askew, because the back of her head is bulbous. It's too large to cover with this wig that's made for a human head. Now, if she were to walk down the streets of Dallas, she might not get a second look. But, to look at her closely, I could see that this was not a human being.
Yeah.
I mean, she had a pencil thin neck. She had a red scarf tied around it to kind of hide it. She wore what appeared to be cotton clothing, a black blouse, long black sleeves, and four long fingers sticking out. Um, and she had on black slacks and a pair of like black nursing shoes with a thick heel to make up for her short stature, I'm sure.
Hmm.
And but she's sitting there with her legs crossed in a non-threatening position, and I don't feel the least bit intimidated. I don't feel like this thing is going to hurt me. And I felt it felt familiar. It's the only way I can describe it. And my first thought was, my God, I wish she'd take those glasses off. And she did right on cue. She took her eyeglasses, big sunglasses off, and then I could see her face clearly. And I recognized her, and it was the entity that I knew as Sue as a child
Right.
that used to interact with us. And she had not aged one day. And I, my next thought was, because I realized pretty quickly we were speaking telepathically. My next thought was, what are you doing in my home? And she said, well, it's nice to see you again, Terry.
Hmm.
She would rarely answer a question, um, but she was there more or less to tell me things. And that's when she told me that the implant would be removed from the top of my leg, and that if I published the book, that my government would not be happy with me. Um, so that was when I saw Betty in 2017. I had another experience with Betty in November of 20 November 21st, 2019. I was in this office here working on doing some writing around 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm kind of typing away, and you can't see it from your vantage point, but there's a chair to my left, and I became aware that there was a presence in the room.
Right.
And I turned my head, and it was the same woman. And it was pretty much the same emotion. I was very relaxed, and I asked her, nice to see you again. Uh, why are you here? And while I'm talking to her, I went to the word processor program I was using, and I looked at the clock on the computer, and I typed 333, um, denoting that it was 3:33 a.m. in the morning, and this was a reminder that this wasn't a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a brief telepathic conversation. And she said, I'm here to tell you that the world will change on February 1st. On February 2nd, it will be a new world. Now, I I took that immediately to be a good message. I took that immediately to be, oh boy, maybe that means disclosure. Um, and that was the real bulk of her message, was that she thinks the world would change February 1st. On February 2nd, it would be a new world. And I went to bed. I mean, it was a brief encounter and she was gone. I went to bed and I woke up the next morning and I was profoundly sad. And I realized that her message had a negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Did she specify? Did you automatically assume it was the following year, or did she specify a certain year?
oh yes, this was November of 2020.
Yep.
You know,
So it would be 2021.
right? She specified February 2021. So I um, I was in contact after this. I didn't know who to talk to, so I was in contact with a gentleman named Kevin Briggs
Mm-hmm.
from Florida. You may have heard of Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin's a good friend of the program. Yep.
Then you know Kevin's prediction,
Yeah.
February
Yep.
1st and 2nd.
Yep.
So we each had the realization of those dates independently. Um, I also talked to Whitley Strieber and I asked him, do you have any, I asked him this in December, do you have any intuition or feeling in regard to the year 2021? And he said, yeah, I do. He said, I have a nagging feeling about February. So there were three of us that had that feeling, that um, intuition that, you know, the world was
Mm-hmm.
going to change. None of us, Kevin thought that it could be a positive thing. Um, and his message was that that UFOs would manifest over the United Nations building in New York City.
Yep.
And if a protocol were in place, they would greet the UN. So he
Wow.
asked if I would contact, because I actually knew someone at the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. But the person I knew had left, but I still got the director's name and sent them a letter and said, because there is no protocol for that. You know, the Office of Outer Space Affairs has a, you know, kind of a esoteric name to it, but it really involves routine satellite trajectory and those
Mm-hmm.
kind of matters more than it does
Yeah. ETs.
routine stuff. Um, so I sent a letter and I said, you know, it's important that you have a protocol in place for these visitors when they show up on February 1st and 2nd. And I sent that in December. And you know, the question is, did they show up? I
Mm.
mean, how do we know?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have no way to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe they did.
Yeah, I remember interviewing Kevin for the summit last year, and we spent a bit of time on that prediction, um, and I just found it pretty fascinating. But so, did you feel like there has been a change? You know.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I'll tell you what happened is that, and it actually kind of worked out to my benefit. But in January, beginning about January 1st, I felt panic. And I've never been, are you familiar with the term prepper? Is that
Mm-hmm.
the term used? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never been a prepper, but I felt the need to replace my 8 foot tall stockade fence that needed to be replaced and install some motion detectors. And I live in Texas, so firearms are ubiquitous here, and
Mm-hmm.
I had plenty of ammunition. And I went out and I bought out a camp stove and a bunch of food. And my wife is like, "What are you doing?" So I was embarrassed to tell her. And I said, "Look, I just want to be prepared in case something bad happens." And she says, did you have a premonition? Do you have some?" And I said, "Yeah, kind of." And she respects my premonitions. If I
Yeah.
ever thought about
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
usually
Yeah.
I I also had the compulsion to sell some stock. Um, and this is I give Betty credit for this, because the idea didn't come from me because I'm not a financial person, but I had stock in like General Motors and Coca-Cola and their
Hmm.
normal things that people fill their portfolio with. And I sold all of it. And I bought some gold and silver. And I bought stock in Moderna,
Right.
Pfizer Labs, Abbott Labs.
Yep.
I bought Gilead. I bought six pharmaceutical stocks I'd never had any experience with, um, but all of them, you know, were very successful
Hmm.
as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So there was a couple of questions I found fascinating that Betty asked you, and one of them in particular, and it was, what does a colony of ants do when it reaches a point beyond self-sufficiency? Did you know what she meant by that?
I did. I did immediately. That's an analogy. In other words, the first thing that crossed my mind was Elon Musk. Um, and he recently announced that he planned to have 100,000 people on Mars by 2030. And that's a pretty ambitious, that's 9 years from now. That's a pretty
Yeah.
ambitious, but he seems to be a pretty shrewd man. Um, so I don't know. That to me, I don't know if I used the analogy in my book or not, but the analogy that came to my mind was the Titanic that sunk, what, April 15th, 1912, in the middle of the Atlantic on its maiden voyage.
Hmm.
And there were the first class passengers, the elite, that got room in a lifeboat. And those in third class and steerage, went to the bottom for the most part. And I thought, well, does this mean that Elon Musk and 100,000 of important and the privileged and the so-called important people
Hmm.
are going to have a ticket, and then they're going to take the lifeboat, and then there's going to be nothing left for the average person. But I think that the hurry to get off Earth speaks of, and
Yeah.
I don't mean to spread fear, but I mean, the obvious is it speaks to a coming calamity.
Yeah. Well, um, we know what happened to the Titanic. It eventually sunk, but let's hope this craft or crafts that are heading to Mars don't run into an asteroid. Or
Hope not.
let's,
They may be the last hope for humanity's
yeah. Well,
continued existence.
so the revelations that Betty made, can you talk about these? Was a prediction one of those?
Well, the prediction was the analogy that the queen leaving with part of the hive and going to establish her own hive is analogous to Elon Musk and the privileged and elite leaving to go to Mars and
Hmm.
settle in a new place for a good reason. The other analogy that she gave me was that, not analogy, but the other information that she gave me was that confirmation that there is another space program that we're not privy to, that the space program through NASA that we all know is the public face of the
Hmm.
space program, and another one exists. And other people have said that too. Um, I there was a man, William Mills Tompkins, um, who was a whistleblower he was 93 years of age. He's been interviewed. Uh, And he's a guy kind of in his 90s, kind of like um, Paul Hellyer from Canada.
Right.
Uh, and the same message that December 8th, there was a man from
Israel, the retired Israeli general.
Haim Eshed. Yes,
Because I was going to ask you whether these revelations that you got from Betty were connected with what he said.
I think very much so. Uh, the implication, I mean, she was pretty plain about this, that we have a separate space program, that we're in contact with ET, that we have people on the far side of the moon, which syncs up with my experience from 1987.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the experience of other people as well. Uh, and so, yeah, it was confirmation for me of a couple of things: the secret space program, the fact that um, the United States is working somehow in concert with ET, um, and the Galactic Federation is not one species but a collection of species, which accounts for so many people having different events, different types of entities. But
Yep.
over the years, it seems to boil down to a pretty solid set of they're insectoid, they're reptilian, they're greys, they fall into one of a half dozen
Yeah.
categories.
Yeah. Kevin Briggs has certainly given us a great insight to that Galactic Federation through the Council of Eight, who he has had plenty of experience with.
I envy his ability to have that kind of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful that I have what limited contact I've had with this woman that I call Betty. As I believe I said in the book, when I saw her, I felt an immediate affection for her in a maternal way, not a romantic way, but in a
Yep.
maternal way. Because I did recognize her as, being there when I was a kid, when they would take me to this white circular room with a gray padded floor.
Yep.
And there were toys, there were objects there for us to play with, but they weren't like trucks or army men or anything. They were geometric forms of different color, and we would arrange them in certain patterns according to her directions. And when we got it right, she would, heap praise on us.
Mm-hmm.
If we got it wrong, she'd encourage us. And one of the things that I remembered was every time I've had two interactions with Betty in my adult life that I remember. Um, the one in 2017 and the one in 2019. And she told me in the 2019 event uh, that we had met when in 1987, when I had the 2 hours of missing time, that she was with me when I had that experience on the other side of the moon, and
Wow.
confirmed that.
Yep.
So yeah, when I was a kid, that we went to this room to play, and always the same group of kids, not from the neighborhood, not from school, and I was very young. I mean, 4 or 5 years of age, and I recall a couple of events from being there, and I recall that we had these colored blocks, colored cubes. Uh, well, I had a cube. Some people had a sphere. Some people had a pyramid, and it weighed nothing. You could hold it in your hand, and it weighed nothing. Now, if I let go of it, it would fall to the floor. But to pick it up, it felt like it had zero mass.
Yeah.
And we would all sit cross-legged on the floor in a semicircle, and we would place our object in front of us, and we were supposed to move it with our minds. And other kids are doing this, and I'm having no luck whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I'm concentrating on this blue cube, and it just flew across the room. And Betty came over and patted me on the back and said, "That's wonderful. You did really, really well."
Hmm.
And I put that in my book. And I have had probably a dozen people
Yep.
tell me that they've had the same experience, reached out to me via email and said, "Oh, yeah, I was there. We did the same thing." And they weren't in St. Louis, Missouri. They were in, Toronto and Florida and California.
Yep.
So,
Wow. So Do you expect to hear from Betty again? I mean, it was 17 and then 19, and I guess if you go by numerical order, 2021, I guess she's due to appear again.
I hope so. I hope so. The last time I felt I walked away with a gift, and that I wasn't aware of it, but I knew that I needed to prepare for something. Now, we're prepared. Nothing happened. I fully expected the world to fall apart at the end of November, and it did, at least in the States, to some extent,
Hmm.
um, but not on a massive scale,
Yeah,
fortunately.
yeah,
But this is not the end. Um, the famous quote from Churchill. It's not even the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning. You know what I'm talking about.
right. Yeah,
We're
yeah,
early on in this process. We got a long way to go.
yeah, yeah. A lot of people, make comments about great to see the back of 2020, I just have this feeling that by the end of 2021, you might wish you were able to go back to 2020. Um,
I
but
agree.
anyway, that's just the feeling I have. But it's just a strange time we're in. The book, um, Devil's Den: The Reckoning. I think what makes it extra special, Terry, are the 30 extra narratives that you've included from other experiences, and I was telling you off air. I mean, it's one of the things I love about this role is speaking with experiences and just letting them talk and telling me, what they went through and how it affected them, and the good or the bad that they got out of it. But those 30 narratives are, just a wonderful addition. And one of them that caught my eye was The Strangers in the Pasture. Is that one you can recall?
Yes, that's the gentleman from South Africa uh, with the and we had an interesting conversation. I never talked with the other folks. I spoke by phone, but being in South Africa, we never had a telephone conversation, but we had a pretty extensive back and forth dialogue. And his English was kind of a mix of English and Afrikaans. So,
Hmm.
um, and there were some differences in phraseology that I thought were unique. He didn't use the word telepathic; he used thought transference. Um, there were a couple other things, but let me tell you the story. Tell the story real quick. And I got an email from this gentleman uh, who's about my age now. And some years ago, 2014 or something, I don't remember the exact year, maybe in 2008. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact year. But he had a family business outside Johannesburg um, that his dad started, and it was a mechanical repair business. They repaired automobiles, farm equipment, because it was an agricultural community, and anything mechanical
Hmm.
that broke down, he said he could fix. And he had a call from his friend one day, a call from a friend named Duncan, who owned a farm, and he said that Duncan was in a state because he was on his tractor and he broke a belt on the tractor. And he said, yeah, I was familiar with the machine, so I knew the part that he needed. So he said that he, hopped in the Land Rover and drove over there and drove to the far back of the field where Duncan said he was waiting. And he got there and he said that Duncan was upset. And he he said he told him, don't raise your voice. He said, come here, I got to show you something. And what it was he was at the very far end of his field, and there was a row of trees, a hedgerow that separated Duncan's property from his neighbor's property.
Hmm.
And on the other side of that hedgerow was a big open field. So Duncan says, come here, I got to show you something. And Duncan is visibly upset. And Duncan pulls, I guess they both were wearing sidearms, which I don't know, maybe it was the custom at the time.
Hmm.
Uh, there's been some instability there. So it's not too surprising. Duncan pulls out his firearm and, he did the same, thinking, he was thinking that there were people over there that were a threat. And he gets through the brush and he saw that there were four stainless steel looking bullet shaped objects, about as big as his Land Rover, big as a full size van. They were all about 3 feet off the ground and they were all spinning at a high speed,
Yep.
clockwise. And he uh, he looked at Duncan and he said, what are these and how did you find these? And his friend explained, well, I was taking the belt off the tractor and he said, I heard a whirling noise and I looked over my head and he said they were in a diamond shaped formation and they flew right over my tractor, right over me and sat down in the field.
Hmm. Wow.
And I said, well, he explained that they'd been there all of about 10 minutes, about the time that it took for him to get to Duncan. Um, so Duncan says that those are spaceships. They got to be spaceships. And he's like, no, spaceships don't exist. He says, that's from Russia or from China. There's no such thing as a spaceship.
Hmm.
So he says, I'm going to go over there and talk to them real friendly like. And, his friend says, with a pistol, well, I'll cover you. And he says, no, put your pistol away. He says, you're going to shoot me in the arse. What he said.
Yep.
So, which I thought comical. And he put his pistol away, and so did Duncan. And he walked over to the nearest ship. And I don't know how to pronounce it. The word he used for the hailing was Haita, Heita, Haita. I don't speak
Okay.
Afrikaans, so I don't know.
No, neither do I.
So he hailed this thing and basically said hello, and it slowed its rotation and stopped. And it stopped and it lowered itself a bit closer to the ground. And I apologize for the siren. There was an arch-shaped doorway that opened up like a camera lens. It just opened up. And he said that standing in the ship was a man in a silver suit who, quote, appeared to be of the Mongoloid race, that he had no hair visible,
Yep.
didn't recall seeing any ears or hair, facial hair. But other than that, looked to be a humanoid entity.
Wow.
And through his words, thought transference, this thing told him, yeah, we apologize for the trespass. We won't be here long. And he had the thought, well, what are you guys doing here? And I like the response they gave. We're here neither to help nor to harm. And he said, we're going to effect some repairs and we'll be gone soon. And of course, he pipes up and says, I'm very good with mechanical things. Could I help you?
Yeah.
And the entity very kindly said, no, but if you'd like to see the inside of our ship, I'd be happy to show it to you.
Wow.
And he's going to do that. And then the entity stops and says, but your friend, he says, your friend is very concerned. He said, I'm afraid that if you come in here, it's not going to go well for him. And Duncan was, up in years and had heart issues.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, yeah, maybe I should go back to my friend.
Yeah.
And he turned around and the door closed and the thing levitated another couple feet off the ground again and started rotating. And he went over and talked to Duncan. And of course, Duncan is, what'd he say? What'd he say? Wanting to know what the conversation was, because he couldn't hear anything. It was all telepathic.
Yeah.
And he explained to Duncan everything that he'd heard. And, in so many of these stories, and very similar to my own, when two people have a shared experience like this, then they drift apart.
Right.
And this is the exception to the rule. He and Duncan were like old war mates or something. They every chance they could get together in private, they'd have a whiskey and talk about that day. And So I found that to be an amazing story.
Yeah, it was. It was, and it's one of 30 that that you've put in the book. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I've got tremendous respect for people who come forward and tell their story. It takes a lot of courage, but after Incident at Devil's Den, you had hundreds of people write to you and talk about their experiences with you, and this is where these narratives have come from.
Yes, I had, as a matter of fact, since March 10th of 2018, I've had over 1,400 people email me. And from those 1,400, there was a core group of about 400 that were just, and not that I'm judgmental of anyone's story. I respect everyone's story, but there were about 400 that were just articulate, that were well stated, in a chronological order that made sense.
Hmm.
And from that 400, I distilled it down to 50. And then from that 50, I pared it down to 30. So those are 30 of probably the best of the best. Um, but I still have enough to probably put together a third book.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to. I'd love to read them, and I think printing the stories too from other experiences. It gives those that haven't come forward yet, maybe gives them a sense of peace that what happened to them wasn't isolated.
You know what? Yeah, I was relieved to see the commonalities between my experience and what other people experienced, and know that, hey, I'm not all that unique. What happened to me happens to a lot of people. Probably way more people than we'll ever know, because some people don't have the luxury of being able to remember or to recall
Yeah, yeah. Well, Terry, we're just about out of time. The Devil's Den, The Reckoning, it's available now. It's been out for probably a couple of months at the time of recording this interview. And how's it go? Has the response been positive?
it. It's been very positive. It was #1 in new releases in across the board in UFO genre, and I think we're ranked #5 this morning. So
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
sales have been good, and the ratings have been good. So I'm
yeah.
very pleased with that.
And I hope this doesn't affect sales or not, but I really do believe that to get the best out of the second book, you at least need to be familiar with the Incident at Devil's Den, the actual the first book you put out.
I agree with that. I won't argue that one bit.
Yeah,
And it really is a sequel. It was meant to be a follow up. It does stand on its own in regard to those 30 stories, but
yep,
the beginning part, especially, we didn't even mention there was a chapter that I wrote for inclusion about a cousin. My
hmm,
plan to steal my father's 32 revolver and kill the entities, the monkey men that were
yep,
troubling me. Those were stories I wanted to include in the first book, and my editor said, no, for sake of brevity, you
yeah,
talked about your childhood, get to the meat of the story. So I left them out, but I feel like they belong there. So
yep, yep. And again, the story about the monkey men can be found on arlhub.com. We've done a 3-part series on that, about Terry's experience through 62 to 64. And the new book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning, available at any good bookstore, as they used to say, but I guess Amazon is the place to go.
Amazon is the bookstore. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Terry, thanks once again for your time. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise. Thank you for the time. I always appreciate being with you.
Terry Lovelace joining us today.